flowed from the tabernacle talks about the clothing that they would wear, very specific and very what seemed to be odd and disconnected commands about things and responsibilities that they had that really in a lot of ways just challenge you to get through that. And so I had the opportunity to study that, and my specific topic was God among his people, a sinful man approaching a holy God, shadows to come. God's plan of atonement by mediation. And I don't know if you caught all that, but mediation is where we begin to focus, to look through, and to discuss. Have you thought about that? And I wanted to use some of those thoughts to introduce us tonight, to think about our service to God. Why do you serve him? What are you doing? What's the point of that? And those thoughts to consider. And I think that this will be a great segue and introduction to it. But the idea of mediation and our need for it can be well introduced by Michael Whitworth's discussion and paraphrase of the things happening in John 8, 2 through 11. John 8, 2 through 11. He says, messy hair, dirty face, ragged clothes, and frail body, in the crowded streets of first century Jerusalem, a young woman's dragged in humiliation to where Jesus is teaching in the shadows of the temple. Her crime? Adultery. Her punishment? Death. And all because her husband had left her lonely. And as she crumples in the streets in shame at the feet of Jesus, she has no chance of mercy from the merciless Pharisees. The young woman has no one to plead her cause. She simply stands condemned to death. And what she needs now is not a lover, but an advocate. In that context, we could well say a mediator, one to plead on her behalf, one to go between the two to cause a resolution to the separation and the distinction that they have between their ideas. And so we need somebody to go between, and that's not something that's new for people. From the very beginning. And I thought this was really interesting. And when you study Genesis 3, remember this narrative and the first sin and the separation from God and the first promise of God in order to bring about Christ and to save us from our sin. And you look at that, a verse stood out to me in Genesis 3 and verse 10 in a way that it hadn't before. You notice here God comes calling. They had eaten of the fruit. They had discovered their nakedness. They became afraid of God. Well, in Genesis 3, verse 9, God comes calling out, hey, where are you? Adam, where are you? What a sad question for your Creator to have to ask you, for you to have to think about. You know where you are. And his response to me, though, was telling, and we see it through from the people of God over and over again. In verse 10, he says, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. I can't be in your presence. I know the penalty of the things that I've done. I cannot be in your presence. I'm scared in the presence of God, like Isaiah. You remember Isaiah chapter 6? We're scared. Holy, holy, holy. And he sees God and he realizes he's in his presence and he's scared. He's afraid. Why? Woe is me. I'm a sinful man, right? I'm a sinful man. I dwell with a people who are sinful and unclean. How can I stand before my God? I've turned my back on you, right? How can I do that? That's not much different from the people in at Exodus 20. The children of Israel, notice what chapter 20, verse 18 says. Now all the people witnessed the thunderings, the lightnings, the flashes, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking. And when the people saw it, they trembled and they stood afar off. Or how about Job? Job 9, 34 and 35. Let him take his rod away from me, and do not let dread of him terrify me. Then I would speak and not fear him, but not so with me. I can't stand in the presence of God. There's no way that I can do it. Look what I've done, and righteous souls and humble hearts will always be. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God in that sense. We're scared. We're afraid, and we're naked. And yet, there's something beautiful that this the foreshadowing, the shadows. God, in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4 says, in the fullness of time, God would bring forth his son, born of a woman, born under the law. Right? That was part of the plan, and a lot of things had to happen in order for that plan to be enacted. But until it did, here is the shadow, Hebrews 10 and verse 1. Leviticus is talking in shadows, speaking words and language in a way. You ever tried to explain something, right, to your children? That's maybe a little bit difficult for them to understand. And you speak in shadows, right? And we speak in a way that we use a language and you can't quite grasp this. And actually what's so amazing about this, 1 Peter chapter 1, the prophets didn't even know. Moses spoke, the prophets spoke. 1 Peter 1 and verse 10, and they earnestly desired to know about the things that they were saying. That's pretty cool. They were serving God and they were ministering and doing the things God had led them to do, and they really didn't even know why they were doing it. They couldn't see the fulfillment of the promise, and there they are. They're giving their lives and serving. And actually, it goes on to say, verse 12, that this salvation that you have, that they were earnestly desiring to see what you have, and that's me and you, by the way. That the age that we live in, the blessing we have to be united in God and not to have to be fearful and afraid in his presence, knowing that we have a mediator, a go-between. The angels wanted to know about that. Angels desired to know the things that you have. The blessing that you have in Jesus. That you have a mediator, somebody that's going to sit on the right hand of God and speak for you. That's going to be a go-between, right? And there is Leviticus, and that's a lot what it's about. But managing that fear and needing that mediator, it was in the beginning that the children of Israel, Exodus 33, verse 15, then he said to him, verses back in chapter 20, when they saw the thunderings and the lightnings and they were afraid, here's what they told Moses. They said, Moses, you speak with us and we'll hear, but let not God speak with us lest we die. The people stood afar off, but Moses drew near the thick darkness where God was. Moses, you go, be our mediator. The people of God have always needed a mediator. That's what Adam desperately wanted when he was naked. That's what Job wanted, somebody, a go-between. They wanted somebody to talk. Here the people said, no, Moses, you go. We can't go in his presence. They always need a mediator, and now we have that. And this was the foreshadowing, and we don't have time to study all the wonderful things, the beautiful things that are seen in Leviticus. I urge you with those thoughts in mind to study that good book, to think about those things. It'll be easier to endure those writings and remembering the hope that we have, remembering that they're written for our learning, the encouragement that they can give us. But that was the foreshadow. If he spoke in shadows, how much better is the substance? How much better? And that's why the book of Hebrews was written, to show us it's better, better, better. Some 13 times that book uses that word. It's better what we have than what they had. Don't go back to that. We've got a mediator now. If you've been washed in the blood, Revelation 1 verses 5 and 6, right? We've been washed in the blood. That happens at baptism, right? Romans 6. You've been immersed in a watery grave of baptism, raised to walk in newness of life. Obey the gospel, the death, the burial, resurrection of Jesus. It says in verse 6, and now God has made you a kingdom of priests, mediators, go-betweens on behalf of the people. Because we have a mediator sitting at the right hand of God, we can now serve God. We can now give our lives to him. That they could now go into the tabernacle. They could now worship on behalf of God. And that was just a picture of what we now have full and completely in Christ, a mediator sitting at the right hand of God. With those thoughts in mind, would you go to 1 Corinthians chapter 9? 1 Corinthians chapter 9. I thought about this a lot, especially after some things that I heard from David Shannon and others. We've talked about them with the elders and their desire. But we've got a lot that we do. Have you noticed that? I'm thankful for all the willing servants, all the individuals, and all the things. I think about Vacation Bible School coming up and the Summer Youth Series and camp. We just got back from a week of camp. Thank you so much for your prayers, your encouragement, just making that possible for all of us, and the ability that we got to go, be uplifted and retreat from the world and focus upon our relationships with God, with one another. It was fantastic. But I think about the mission trip that's coming up. And we could go on and on with the things that we do and the opportunities that we have. But why are we doing those? What is the point of our service? And I think Paul Well encourages us this evening and has us think about something that's very important that I hope to leave with you tonight. Look at 1 Corinthians 9, beginning in verse 19. For though I'm free from all men, I've made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. To the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law to Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. That's a really beautiful passage, and actually 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is really a powerful, set in the midst of a context. It almost seems like Paul forgets what he's talking about. If you begin in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, Paul begins and starts talking about eating meats that are sacrificed to idols. He's talking about how a Christian should deal with the pagan ritual of idol worship and the meats that they would offer, and then they would go sell them in the market. Could a Christian eat of that meat or not? Apparently that was an issue the Corinthians were dealing with. So he starts handling that subject, and then he finishes with that with chapter 10. In chapter 10, he finishes with this idea of how do we eat, and he expounds upon what we should do in terms of this issue of idol worship and these meats. But chapter 9 is like, Paul, did you get off course? Paul, did you forget what you're talking about? Right? Preachers tend to chase rabbits at times. Paul, is that what you've done here? But it seems more likely that Paul knew exactly what he was doing, guided by the Holy Spirit. And he gives us an illustration of him using his freedom. An illustration of him using his freedom that he has in Christ. And you'll notice the first half, and what it comes down to is in many ways, there's a lot of lessons here, but the financial support. The first half of chapter 9, he says, I could have, you're obligated, Corinthians, to support me. Financially, it would have been right for me to earn my income from the work that I'm doing as a minister. And he gives several issues. If you want to read that, you can see the point that he's making. But then he defends, now in the second part, in the midst of the verses we just read, he defends why he's not going to take that support. Let me tell you why I'm not going to do that. Why I'm not going to take, and I love some of these things and narrow in on it and really think about, we're a kingdom of priests, right? This kingdom of 1 Peter chapter 2. We are charged with the task of building up the body of Christ, the house of God, with living stones, Peter would talk about, that giving what is our acceptable service before God, Romans and Hebrews would talk about, right? This need for us to serve. But I think maybe we get distracted. At times. But notice what he did. I have the freedom. I have the freedom. And you think about the Jews. To the Jews, I became a Jew. To those who are weak, I became weak. To the Greeks, I became a Greek. And you think about all he did. A lot of people have taken and run with this phrase or these thoughts and ideas and said, well, Paul is just kind of a chameleon. He was kind of one of those guys without a backbone. One of the guys, he told this group over here what they wanted to hear, and then he would go over here and he'd tell this group what they wanted to hear, and so he made the gospel sound good to no matter what do you think? What do you think is good and what do you think is right? And that's not at all what God or what Paul did or what we've been called to do. There's no compromise in who he was and what he's doing. And remember, it's in a section that's talking about our freedoms, our rights and our privileges. We never have a right to go against the mandated law of God, his will, but there are some things in which we have the freedom of, some opinions and so forth. And I think it is relevant to the topic and discussion of, why are you serving? I made myself a servant to all that I might win the more. You think about, why are you here? Think about, what are we doing? I signed up and put my name on that list. I signed up and put my name on this. I'm doing what God wants me to do. But when you dig in here and you see what motivated Paul, what got him going, what was he doing in his service? And verse 23 really stands out to me, and I hope to leave you with that. Now, all this I did. Why did I sacrifice so much? Why did I do different? Can you imagine? I guess we can bring it up again. You think about some of the issues that we're facing. Maybe you could say as a country. And as a ripple effect, the church is going to have to deal with those issues as well. As we're charged to live in this world. We are divinely mandated, Ephesians chapter 3, to be the church and let the manifold wisdom of God be known to the world. That's the church's responsibility. That's your responsibility and my responsibility. And we do that through our service. And as we think about the issue, how are we going to reach those folks? We're going to just put effort after effort. We've gone to VBS. We got VBS. We had a good VBS, and we're doing all the things that we're supposed to be doing in this service. And it jumps off the page to me. Now, this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. What is the gospel? What's the gospel? Paul, what I love about Paul, when he would write sometime in Romans, he did this several times, and he did it in Philippians. We talked about my God, but he said, that's my gospel. It's a little bold, Paul. You didn't die for us. The death, the gospel, the death, the burial, the resurrection, and Paul writes and says, my gospel. He took ownership of it. He lived it out so completely and fully that it was his. It was real in his life that for the gospel's sake, I do all of these things. Is that why you serve? Is that why you put your name on the list? Is that why you stepped up to do those things? I'm looking at me because I think about the end of camp, and I look at that, and we had a great camp. We survived. We came home and we all made it back. Right? We had some tire issues and difficulty, but we all arrived and made it home. And we had the most people we've ever had maybe at VBS this year. We pat ourselves on the back and look what a good job that we've done, and all the people that came here, and right, the leadership initiative and the opportunity that we have and the resources that you also richly share so that we can encourage these young men and do the things that we're going to do. What is the point of it all? Why did Paul give his life? What service? This great mediator that now sits at the right hand of God. He died for you and me. The death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus. That's why I serve this way. I do it for the gospel's sake. And I hope that will motivate you in your service. It's a lot like this morning. Okay, if I can wrap that up and bring this back and conclude with these thoughts. As you think about our responsibility, that test we talked about? That test, and so God is testing us at times when individuals come in our life and we want to act out in vengeance. We might want to respond and talk to them in a way we want to get back at them. We want to get them, and yet God says there's no peace there when that happens. Let God work there. And can you imagine for a moment though, you're driving down the highway and somebody cuts you off? How do you react and respond to that? If it's your prerogative and it's your ability that you go and teach them a lesson and you go cut them back off just to show them and do that, do you think God's going to How are you going to respond to the greater test when maybe a spouse is unfaithful? How are you going to respond, and what's going to be your action when a brother comes and does something that's abusive and unreasonable? Well, God's expecting us to be the hands and feet of His service, right? The hands and feet of Christ in this world. To whom much is given, much is required. And we think about these tests and these opportunities and the service that we have. Paul said, I did it for the gospel's sake. And I hope that as we think about all the things that we're signing up to do, all the opportunities we have, I've been thankful. I don't know how about you. It kind of got to the point of the Leviticus list, the bulletin. The bulletin for me got to like Leviticus. It was really important for us to think about, but why are we talking about that over and over again? Do you remember that? All the deacons and their ministries and all their works were in there. And I thought, why are we keep putting those in there? You know, can we do something else with this space? And you ever thought about the responsibility that they have, the service that they give, and how important that is for us to know? These are the ministries in which we're involved in. The opportunities that you have to connect with those individuals, that they have the responsibility and the opportunity to lead you in greater service to God. Ephesians chapter 4, that we can all grow together, that we can be firmly knit together in the service that we can give one to another and to Christ. This for the gospel's sake. And I hope that you'll be encouraged to think about that. Why am I doing this? Don't get lost in maybe numbers, and don't get lost in maybe who's not there and what hasn't happened, or what has happened in a way that's not the way we're supposed to glory and boast about these things. The death, the burial, and the resurrection. We have the opportunity through these different events to not lose sight of that fact, that that's what we're trying to teach folks, to save a soul. Those who do not obey the gospel, right? 2 Thessalonians 1. What a fearful thing to fall in the hands of God, right? That are going to face the wrath of God. Those who do not obey the gospel, respond to His love, that have a mediator that sits at the right hand of God. It's our opportunity to spread that word and to let individuals know about that. Why are you serving? Why have you signed up? Why haven't you signed up? What talents do you have? God is not going to be able to use you if you just won't use the least of what you have. Right? To whom much is given, much is required, but to who little is given, a little is required. Something is required, and we encourage you to use your service for the gospel's sake. And I hope that we'll remember that and be encouraged by that. And that even greater than that is sitting at the right hand of God right now is somebody who wants to mediate on your behalf. Your sin has separated you from God, and yet now we have somebody who knows our name. He sympathizes with our every weakness. What foreshadowed and what the angels desired to look into, we now have, so we can be humble, faithful servants of His. Is anybody discouraged? I want to serve. I've longed to serve and be that. I know I just don't know where, maybe, right? I don't know what question you have. I want to be of greater service. Scared to step. I don't know what could be on your mind, or maybe the lack of service and the guilt that you face. I don't know. Or you want to know, hey, how can I serve? What role can I play? Where can I fit in? We have some incredible elders, great deacons who long to talk to you about that, encourage you to get involved. But as we do, let's remember it's for the gospel's sake. The death, the burial, the resurrection of Jesus, that we might see Him one day, that He can mediate on our behalf. There's somebody who needs to respond this evening, or obey the gospel, to be immersed in a watery grave of baptism, raised to walk in newness of life, or any other thing that we could help you with. We'd love to do that as together we stand and as we sing.